Texas A&M, you mentioned that game. So are you a proponent, not that Notre Dame has been shy about this, or this is unfamiliar territory of traveling somewhere in Columbus, Ohio 2 years ago, or shoot, pick the year that they haven't started against a reasonable opponent, but this time going to SEC territory. So are you good with not breaking in the schedule, maybe week 3 being that big matchup, but right out of the gate, bam, you get hit in the face with 105,000 fans?
I don't prefer it, but I don't mind it. It's not one of those things where I'm like, oh, this is just terrible scheduling. Because there are some advantages to it, right? You get extra time to prepare for that game. You've got all a full camp, so you can decide whenever you want to start doing install for that game, whether it's a week before, 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before. You can decide whenever you want to do it. Gives you a little bit more time to prepare. And then if you've got new coaches or new players, which Notre Dame does, they have a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback and some new guys. They don't have film on what you're going to look like and what you're going to do. I mean, no one's ever seen Riley Leonard take a snap in a Notre Dame uniform. He didn't even play in the spring game, so it's going to be the first time. So there's some advantages in that regard. But then, of course, but you're playing a tough team and you don't have a warm-up game. Well, neither do they. So this is Texas A&M's first game too. So they're working with the same thing. It'd be different if, like, let's say A&M had a week 0 game and they kicked the season off against, I don't know, Texas Southern or something like that, and they had kind of their warm-up game, and then Notre Dame had to go down there. I'd maybe have a little bit more of a problem with it. But look, they're in year 1 of a new coach. They've got 2 new coordinators. They have guys they have to replace. They've got a quarterback that's a very talented player. It's only started, I think, what is it, 7 or 8 career games, right? So there's no excuses, right? And so I'm okay with it. I would always prefer, as a football coach, to have sort of a game that's a get-right game to start things off with. I've always felt that's the best way to prepare. And that's also bias. I mean, that's what I've always known. I coached at the Division III and the 1AA level. We had scrimmages. We had things where we can kind of do things to get ramped up and get ready for the season that they just don't have at the FBS level. I think the FBS level is the only level of football that I know of that doesn't have preseason football. NFL does. 1AA does, I believe, at least they used to when I coached there. D2 does, D3 does, and high school football does. So I've always felt it that way as a football coach, but as long as it's an even situation, meaning the other team doesn't have a game before you, you know what? Go out and win. If you're that kind of team, if you're a team that thinks you can be this, then you should be able to handle this. And the difference now between 2 years ago is that was Marcus Freeman's first game, period, much less on the road. You had a different roster than you did now, and you are facing an established program with an established quarterback. You're not doing that now. And even then, Mark, as tough as that was, Notre Dame had a lead in that game until about, 30 seconds to go in the third quarter. So it's not like they just went out there and just completely laid an egg. They got beat by a team that just, I thought, had the best football player in the field that day, and it wasn't really close. And C.J. Stroud, and that ultimately was the difference in the game.
No doubt about that. And, of course, that team ultimately almost won the national championship, so no shame in that. Brian Driscoll's here, Irish Breakdown. So head on over there. And while you're here, please like the video and subscribe to the Voice of College Football. We've got great guests all the time. Peter Burns, SEC Network the other day. Phil Steele, Tony Barnhart's going to be dropping by here in the next few days. So be locked in here as well. You mentioned, kind of alluded to the coaching matchup. Mike Elko, what a job he did at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
But his first game at Texas A&M, but he has, unlike what he mentioned with Freeman a couple of years ago, he has been a head coach, of course. So a different dynamic there. How are you measuring Marcus Freeman's progress as a head coach?
Meaning, how do I measure it? How do I view it? Or what's the standard by
at the
which?
End of the year saying, oh, they went 8-4, that was a disappointment, or boom, they went to the national championship game. But as you've seen him from day one through right now preparing for a third season, do you see any noticeable differences?
Yeah, I think in each year we've seen him improve in areas you need to improve. They were a better team in year 2 than they were in year 1. Now the standard is going to be, can you be a better team in year 3? And then better by how much? I mean, that's the other part of this too, is how much better do you get in year 3? The Notre Dame schedule is not easy, like some people say it is, but it's not a gauntlet like they've had in past years either. It's not like, 2017 where you've got to play Georgia and Michigan State, who ended up winning 10 games that year. Georgia was the national runners-up. You got to play both of them before the first month of the season is over with. You know what I mean? It's not like that. It's a schedule to where you should have the better roster and all, but maybe 1 or 2 games, maybe. And so can you go out and improve in the area, stay good in the areas that you were good? Because that can be a challenge for coaches, especially coaches who aren't, top level coaches, is you establish something and you've made it good. It's got to stay there, right? Like you've established you have one of the better defenses in college football. Okay, it's got to stay there, right? Well, you lost players. So did everybody else, right? So you've got to stay there. And then can you improve in areas where you need to improve? Can you do a better job of playing well in the big games? And that's something that Notre Dame has been very inconsistent with so far. You battled Ohio State twice, but you lost twice. I mean, I don't care how hard you battled, you're 0-2. You went out and smacked USC this year, but this was a 7-6 USC team. Year before, when they were a lot better, you went out there and you got beat. You beat Clemson in year 1, but you lost to them in year 2, in an inferior version of Clemson, in my opinion, in year 2. So it's just about, can you avoid this? Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman has been very much this as a program, that up and down type of thing, where some weeks they look like world beaters. Like, man, this team is good. And then the next week you're like, how did you lose to Stanford when you went on the road and beat Drake May in North Carolina convincingly? I think the final was 55-32, but it was like 45-32. I think it was like 42-17. I mean, it was not a competitive football game. They scored on a couple bombs late in the game. Like, they destroyed North Carolina, who played in the ACC title game. They destroyed Clemson, who played in the ACC title game, won 10-plus games. And then they go lose at home they take Ohio State down to the wire, play the Buckeyes hard. And then they lose at home to Stanford. Like, what? You go out and you smack USC and you smack Pitt, and then you just lay an egg against Clemson the next week. It's like, those are the kind of things that this team is going to have to avoid, and that's going to be the standard by which I evaluate Coach Freeman now, is can he stay more steady with his football team? Brian Kelly was very steady, and what I mean by that is he was going to beat everybody he was supposed to beat and lose to everybody that had a comparable team that he had. That was Brian Kelly's MO. They rarely beat the teams that were on their level, but they beat everybody else beneath them, right? So Coach Freeman has shown a better ability already to beat teams that are on their level, but then you have a couple games you're like, how did you beat that team? How did you do that to Ohio State? How did you take Ohio State down to the wire and just get rolled for 2 whole quarters by Louisville and get beat by Clemson? Like, I don't understand how you can destroy USC and Caleb Williams and you get beat by Cade Klubnik. Like, it's that kind of up and down that he's going to have to avoid in year 3, and that's going to determine if they're just a good team that's slowly getting better, or if they can kind of take that big year 3 jump that past great Notre Dame coaches have done.
And by the way, USC fans, will correct Brian. 8-5. You gave them 7 wins there.
8-5.
They may
That's
be
better for Notre Dame because it improves the record of teams that they played. But yes, 8-5. I apologize.
So connected to all that are expectations, and it's come out of your mouth a couple times about advancing a couple games deep into the playoffs. So is that the definition of a good season?
Yes, for me. Now, well, a good season. No, the definition of a good season is a lower bar than that. I mean, to me, if Notre Dame is a playoff team and loses in the first round, that's improvement. That's a good season. The standard isn't to have a good season. The standard is to be better than what you were last year and really raise the bar. I mean, you're at Notre Dame. You're in year 3. You're known as a great recruiter, and I think that he is. You've hired this. You've got one of the best coordinator combinations in college football now. You've got guys coming back. A lot of the excuses that they've been able to use I shouldn't say they've been able to use, because one thing I like about the staff is they don't make excuses, but people have used for them are kind of gone. And so now, to me, it's not just making the playoff, but make the playoff and do damage. Because if Notre Dame is a 5 seed, for example, then my standard for what makes a season that lived up to the expectations is different than if they're the 6 seed. Because if they're the 5 seed, then they're going to get a team that's most likely going to be beneath them in the ranking. You're going to get the ACC champ or the Big 12 champ, most likely, right? Well, okay, so if you win the first round game at home and lose the second, you lost to a team that's beneath you, right? I mean, that's kind of how I evaluate it. So it just depends on how the playoff schedule works. But I've looked at it this way: the bar for me to say Marcus Freeman moved the needle with this program is playoff +1. That's what it is to me. That's the standard for, okay, yes, they are headed in the direction that this team can eventually go compete for a championship, is playoff +1.
Now, I can already hear complaints out there if Notre Dame gets the 5 seed, because they'll get the group of 5. And so that's going to be, and then they're going to roll into, and who knows how the season's going to play out. But the expectations are the Big Ten and the SEC are going to load up that top tier. And so, yeah, we could have the 13th or 14th ranked teams in the country be the ACC and Big 12 champions. And so there's going to be that thought that, what's going on here? Notre Dame's got that 5 seed, and they're lined up for the first 2 games.
Well, look, the reality is Notre Dame getting the playoff is going to cause somebody to be mad, right? I mean, they didn't play it for a conference championship. Okay, that's why they're playing a home game at first round. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if Notre Dame's not the 5 seed, then they're playing a pretty darn good team from the SEC or the Big Ten, most likely at home, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. If Notre Dame goes out this season, for example, and is a 5 seed, it means they're at least 11-1, if not 12-0. I think that's probably where they need to be if they're going to be a 5 seed. And I would say 11-1, depending on who and when you lose, may not get you the 5 seed, which is a different animal. But if Notre Dame does what they did in 2020 and does what they did in 2018, which is the run the table in the regular season, they will have earned that's their version of, it's not a bye, but it's an easier path. Just like if you're a conference champion, you get an easier path because you don't have to play in the first round. You don't have to, play a team at your place and those type of things. So look, people are going to complain about Notre Dame being successful no matter what happens. There's no scenario that's going to make non-Notre Dame fans happy until they join a conference, and they're not going to join a conference. So I stopped listening to people complain about, what Notre Dame does or doesn't get a long time ago.
We'll save that conversation for the off season. We've waged it a few times, but that's about where I was about to go next. But it's August. It's football time. We'll focus on that. Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown. Brian, it's great to see you. Appreciate you being here as always for Notre Dame football talk.
Thanks for having me on.